and looking at our policies around policing, for example. So my question is, will there still be a commitment? There are all these statements. Will there still be a commitment to anti-Black, anti-racist work in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? Or will this just be a flavor of the month, and so before these statements were made, what was happening in your library? Who was doing the work? Reach out to them and recognize their work. And so I do recognize taking actions. You know, the most change can happen in a number of places, and there's LIS education and work in the associations and library, looking at our library leaders and managers. But I would be, you know, specifically for the BCAL, I would be interested then. You've got your statement now. Where's your, it's a call to action, but now I would like to see an action plan. And one thing that David said that really got me thinking was also that it's not, when you're talking about the outward facing, yes, it's not just what we do in the context of librarians in the library. I've seen statements that actually, I kind of like statements that actually show you what you could do, and some of that was how you could contribute, organizations that you could contribute to, whether it's your time, whether it's funding. That was I can't remember which statement that was, but that was an interesting statement in that it encouraged you to actually take action. So I have more to say, but maybe in the other questions as well.
Thank you, Norda. We'll keep those ideas in mind in our meetings for BCALS. Now on to David. You're still
there we go,
unmuted.
unmuted. All right, it just takes me a while because apparently I've not been on Zoom enough. That word commit is, thank you for flagging that, Norda, because, right, well, it's one of those words, right? That's because the statements, I mean, I read so many when I was writing that article this summer, and, you know, like G4S, the security company that like, you know, whose operatives murdered a man, and they had an anti-racist statement citing Dr. King, right? I mean, so, you know, all these statements become a little bit, they tend to sort of bleed together a little bit, but they do have those interesting words that I think are really worth reflecting on, and thanks for flagging that Norda. I'm going to think about that word commit. One of the things I do think was notable about the BCALS statement was the explicit reference to police violence as a structural phenomenon, and a kind of gesture towards the kind of divestment that can get us thinking about abolitionism. So I did think that was notable about the BCALS statement. When it comes to the specific matters of sort of following statements with actions, following words with actions, walking the walk, all these kinds of phrases, that's something, again, that was in pretty much every statement that I read, you know, whether it was from sort of a major corporation or a publicly funded institution. And I guess I don't think the problem is simply one of a lack of follow-through, right? I think the more important question to ask is, what kinds of anti-racist politics and actions does the statement advocate or suggest in the first place? Because in some cases, I don't want them to follow through on their anti-racism, right? If it's a crappy statement, they shouldn't follow through on it, right? So in other words, the problem of institutional engagement with anti-racism is less one of superficiality and disingenuousness, right? It's not simply a failure to follow up words with concrete actions. And I think it's more a problem, again, of the anti-racist politics that the statements and the institutions making them are promoting, right? So it's a question of whether or not those politics are about meaningfully challenging racism as a problem of structural subjugation, or simply about, you know, making existing structures more comfortable and sustainable, right? And I think too often the desire to sort of move directly to action ends up simply reproducing the same sorts of institutional logic around, you know, what addressing questions of racialized power looks like, which results in the same kind of tired EDI initiatives, you know, hire more library workers, as Norda pointed to, you know, do more implicit bias training, read White Fragility or Me and White Supremacy or whatever other self-help book is popular. And the words, I think that the interesting shift we're seeing right now is that a to a small extent, some of the sort of more corporate language of EDI, you know, diversity, cultural competence, it's sort of falling by the wayside a little bit. And folks are now using a sort of more militant language around anti-Black racism, decolonization, white privilege, and so on. But what's not changing is the underlying assumptions and logics, which are still sort of assumptions and logics of EDI, and they're more or less the same. And I think people in our field have been saying stuff like "stop talking, start doing," right? Is the title of a book in LAS for decades and decades, right? And the problem is that words like action and, you know, phrases like hard work, they end up meaning the same kinds of non-threatening modes of institutional celebration that have been around for decades. And I don't think academic libraries are any less prone to this. But I think people don't really want to take seriously the reality that a lot of us are really disillusioned with EDI. And it's not just because it's all talk and no action. It's not just because it's superficial. It's not just because it's, you know, often about photo ops. It is all those things. But I think a lot of folks are increasingly disillusioned with EDI because of the racial politics that it actually represents, because of its fundamental logics, right? And I think that as the uprisings this summer were unfolding, we saw a lot of that being expressed. And you know, like a lot of other folks I was approached, you know, as a lot of us are in these sort of very select moments to have conversations. I expect folks on this panel might have had the same experience. I don't want to assume too much. But a lot of these conversations start with what are some concrete actions we can undertake to make ourselves into an anti-racist library. And as some of my panelists have alluded to, there's an assumption that there's already a shared and sufficient understanding of the problem of racism. And what that does is it bypasses the less manageable questions about the complex ways that racial subjugation manifests at the foundations of the institution in the first place. So, you know, when these questions are asked, you know, I felt like saying, study up, right? Engage in a sustained way beyond the moment, beyond the few months, or maybe if we're lucky, a year that you're going to be interested in this, right? Do that quiet work, show that you're interested in learning about the stuff, that you're not just working with the same kinds of institutionally validated versions of anti-racism. You know, I do think there are things that people could try doing in general, right? You know, we can get to that later if we want to, you know, brainstorm practical ideas. I think it's worth recognizing that not everybody is in the same circumstances. There are, you know, real constraints in people's lives that kind of directly affect what they can and can't do from within a position in academic library. So like that's real, right? And a lot of people are in precarious positions, and, you know, maybe some folks only have the capacity to go to work and sort of try to survive the day, and then maybe use an Angela Davis text as an example at the reference desk, and that's it. And that's, you know, and if that's the capacity that folks have, that's real, right? But, you know, whether it's talking about, you know, divesting from relationships with the police at a campus or level, or demilitarizing campuses, divesting from fossil fuels, right? You know, all kinds of other things, you know, challenging the way we frame mental health and quote unquote wellness, right? All those things are really important. We can talk more about those kinds of things later. I mean, stopping using Zoom as a platform because it's censored Palestinian speakers. There's lots of other alternatives to Zoom. I'm not just saying that to the organizers of this event, excuse me, but something to maybe consider since Zoom's sort of everywhere. There are lots of these kinds of things, excuse me. But, you know, whether they take, you know, whatever form they take, excuse me, or I think the most important thing is that, you know, they be undertaken whilst this, excuse me, whoa, simultaneously and sort of meaningfully engaging. Okay, I'm gonna pause there and mute because I'm having a coughing fit. Apologies.
Okay, hopefully you feel better. And Maha, the question to you.
Thank you. So I come from an appreciative inquiry framework, so that's how I'm going to approach it. And Ashley also mentioned I come from my perspectives as a first-generation minority librarian as well. So previous scholarship in academia or libraries mentioned that we don't even have statements on EDI. So now just about everyone has a statement. Okay, so I understand the pessimism. I'm there with you guys. There's EDI fatigue for people like us who've been doing this work for a long time. But I also think, like Ashley mentioned, we have to take some steps towards moving forward. And I think statements is one of those small steps, maybe the first step that's being taken by associations or academic institutions or academic libraries. It is the first step, but it's only acknowledging that we agree that something is working or something is not working and something needs to be changed. We understand that something is wrong, we need to change it to make it right. But unfortunately, we don't always know what exactly is wrong until we see it in black and white. And then we go, okay, that is wrong, especially in EDI work. We know what is not right, but we don't always know exactly how to put a face to the wrongness in EDI. We didn't even have the words, the terminology that we have now, like vocational awe or white fragility. These are all fairly new terminology that when I started EDI work, I was like, what would I call that? What would that be? And I couldn't find the words. So these are all fairly new words that we've come up with. So it's a great thing that we are moving ahead with, terminology and statements and taking baby steps towards making EDI better. I'm also not sure I completely agree that our EDI work is not always recognized. If we are getting promotion or tenure or a job based on our EDI work or permanency in our jobs, I think that is some kind of recognition. I know that we have to go way beyond that, but we do get some kind of recognition for sure. As we all acknowledged, we are all individuals trying to do one thing. So for institutions, associations, these statements are the one thing that they think, okay, I can do this to start with, but we are telling them that's not enough. You need to go way beyond that. Stop saying you're committed, show that you're committed, show that in your action, right? So I was glad to see that BCAL, I'm also going to call it BCAL, had some strong words, but we need to move ahead with how we make these strong words happen. For example, you say actively condemn or concretely support something. So how do you actively condemn racism? Do you know what that looks like? How do you concretely support somebody? Do you know what that looks like? Have you had a situation that you can use to say, okay, if something like this happened, this is what we would do. You don't need to put that out as a statement, but as an additional document to fall back on. I know some of us now in our height of emotion because of what's happening all around us with EDI, we're saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it this way. But we don't really know how exactly that will look when it comes to action, a single situation. And what about the librarians who come 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when they look at the statement, will they know how they would actively condemn something? Would that mean putting out a statement saying we actively condemn this behavior? Is that enough? Or is that just going to become another statement over a statement over a statement? So we need to have more action plans, like Norda said. That is very important. And that comes in academic institutions, unfortunately, through policy making. That's the only way we can get it done in academic institutions. So we have to work on that. For this EDI statements to actually have any meaning, EDI work has to become part and parcel of everything we do. Are you doing this in your teaching? Are you doing this in your services? Are you doing this in your collections? I think most people will say, or quite more people will say, yeah, we have a very multicultural collection. We're working on this collection versus that collection. But libraries are about collection. We need to go beyond that in our services, in our hiring of people, whether it's cluster hiring or specialty hiring. But hiring is only one piece, like one step. The next step would be to have them included in everything you do, all the way to leadership positions. That would make it more EDI centered. I also